Farooq. Thank you so much. Uh, because we're Bombay and Khaki Tours is based in Bombay, I'll start with something that is not in the presentation. So I'll start with that. I just want to pin a location in your mind because we'll come back to that at the end of the talk. Uh, I want you to keep in mind Mahim, Bandra, and Thane. And we'll come back to these three locations at the end of the talk. Please note, this is not part of the presentation in a very deliberate manner. So this is not something you'll be searching on the presentation. Diksha, I think we can go to the first slide. We often talk of heritage when we talk of heritage, we think of monuments, right? So when you go to say Ajanta, Ellora, and or maybe the Taj, you go to Varanasi, you see the Ghats. Uh, so we are always talking in terms of monuments when we talk of heritage. We're talking now today about living heritage and textiles as living heritage. So I want you to look at the words that are leaping out of this phrase, this paragraph that's there. It says living heritage refers to the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. This intangible cultural heritage, transmitted from generation to generation, is constantly recreated by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature, and their history, and provides them with a sense of identity and continuity, thus promoting respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. Now, this is the UNESCO's definition of what a living heritage constitutes. And if you look at the words that have been highlighted, which are practices, knowledge, skills, objects, artifacts, communities, intangible, transmitted from generation to generation, recreated, sense of identity and continuity. Now, if you look at just these words and string them together, the one part of our heritage that absolutely ticks all these boxes is on your next slide. Diksha, the next slide, please, which is textiles as our living heritage. Even today, weaving tends to be a very traditional and hereditary occupation and requires a lot of occupational interdependencies. In the case of indigenous textiles, they're part of the identity of a particular community. So they carry with them the print of their history and evolution. For example, if you look at the tribes of the Northeast, every tribal textile is like a badge or an ID card that the tribe carries with them. The color, the number of stripes, the width of the stripes, the placement of the stripes, all these belong to the identity of that tribe. Even if you Google, you will look at Naga shawls and you will see that every particular shawl is supposed to be used only by a certain tribe, by a certain person within the tribe who is eligible to use that. So textiles are not just roti kapda makan the way we look at it today, but there's a lot of history to it. Perhaps if you close your eyes and think of your own personal textiles that you have, the ones that evoke the most nostalgia are probably the ones that you have inherited. Maybe it's a great grandmother's shawl, your mother's wedding sari, or your grandfather's silk dhoti, or a piece of hand woven or handcrafted tablecloth that's been done and passed from generation to generation. All these, while for you it's a personal memory and history, family history, extrapolated to a community, and we're talking about much more than just roti kapda makan. Next slide, Diksha. Coming up on your screen is a museum of living textiles, which is founded by Vimod. The Vimod Museum of Living Textiles in Bangalore houses a collection of rare saris. Its founder, Pavitra Muddaya, believes that these designs and techniques can inspire generations of weavers and designers. Now, Vimod itself is a store that is currently into its third generation, and their work is well documented and in the cyberspace, so it's easy to Google. But what is interesting here is that Wimore chooses to call this a museum of living textiles in a very firm and assertive manner of telling us that textiles are not dead. They are living and they continue to inspire generations of weavers and designers. I think this is a very critical difference because when I go to, say, a Prince of Wales museum and I look at the textile gallery, those are textiles of the past. Yeah. We don't talk probably of a museum being contemporary, being living, being a space which is still vibrant and capable of inspiring current generations. But where did all this begin really? The next slide, Diksha. I'm choosing to peg this at Cherial for a very unique reason. Now, those who probably are a little aware about textiles would know that the weaver community is called the Padmasalis, predominantly in the south, and they believe they've originated from sage Markandeya and a rishi called Bhavana Rishi. Now, the Bhavana Rishi Purana traces this ancestry and genealogy of the Padmasalis. Yeah, even today before Sankranti, the weaver community down south worships a ball of thread, which symbolizes Bhavana Rishi uh, in the in their scheme of things. Now, the Kuna police who had helped the Rishi win against the Asuras were rewarded the right to perform this story for their livelihood before the weavers. These ballads were hand painted on khadi by Cherial scroll painters. So these panels were about 40 to 45 feet long and nearly 50 panels long at times. And each panel depicted one element of the Bhavana Rishi Purana. What is important here, the mythology apart, is that it speaks of two distinct things that guide textiles, handcrafted textiles even today. One is the continuity of tradition from generation to generation. The second is the economic and cultural interdependence of local communities. So you have the Padmasalis who are the weavers who worship and claim ancestry with sage Markandeya and Bhavana Rishi. You have the Kunapulis who have the right to recite the story for them annually in return for a small fee. And you have the Cherial scroll painters or the Nakashis who actually paint this entire story so the Kunapulis can recite this. So we have three communities dependent economically and culturally on each other. The next slide, Diksha. What you see on your left is an image depicting a scene from Bhavana Rishi Purana, and on the right are the famous Cherial masks. There are very few Nakashis left in Telangana right now. Cherial is a very small town, about 100 kilometers from Hyderabad, and that is where the concentration of the Nakashis are. Vaikuntham Nakash is a national awardee, and along with his sons, he is one of the few practitioners of this art form. And he visits Paramparik Karigar that happens annually in Mumbai every year. He comes there, and the art is very, very affordable. Though they have, of course, expanded beyond scroll paintings now and do a whole host of things, as you see, these wall hangers and masks. So the next time Paramparik Karigar is around, do drop by and you could meet a national awardee who can tell you more about the history of this. The next slide. Right. We come to the Indus Valley civilization where the entire story really began. The next slide, Diksha. What you see here on your screen is a woman spinning yarn, that's airy silk, using a wooden spindle in Assam. Now, if you look at the wooden spindle she's using, we've had evidences of that as far back as the Indus Valley civilization. In 1929, archaeologists recovered fragments of cotton textiles at Mohenjo-daro dating between 3250 and 2750 BCE. The earliest evidence of textiles at Harappa goes back to 3300 BCE. Terracotta spindle whorls have been found at the IVC sites, indicating that the oldest way to make yarn was to spin it by hand, a practice that we now call khadi. It continues in many parts of the country even today. So we're talking of a nearly 5,000-year-old history for not just cotton, but also of implements that we have been using. If it was terracotta or bone back then, we have wooden spindles in use even now. Cotton seeds were found at Mehergarh and have been dated to around 5000 BC, showing that cotton cultivation existed even back then. Vedic scriptures refer to cotton spinning and weaving and act as a very critical evidence and of the importance that this activity had in the economy back then. And I want you all to peg this because you could compare it to what importance it has today. 5,000 years ago, that was the importance given, and today, where does it really stand? The next slide, please. This is an image that most people would probably recognize if they. I think this is the view from the back. It's the famous bust of the priest king of Harappa. Now, research has us to believe that the pattern that you see on that cotton shawl that the priest king is wearing, the trefoil pattern, is supposed to be block printed, which means the hand block printing techniques existed way back then. It is highly probable that this is a block printing technique that we now call ajrak, considering the region this comes from. The motif is said to be called the kakar, which symbolizes the coming together of the sun, water, and earth gods. It's a trefoil pattern. So we not only have evidence of cotton being woven, we have evidence of block printing, and we also have evidence that cotton was not restricted to the common man. This is a priest king wearing a cotton shawl, block printed, probably ajrak. The next slide, please, which brings me to the story of cotton itself. The first people to cultivate cotton in Eurasia were the Harappans. Herodotus wrote in 400 BCE that trees that grow wild, producing a kind of wool better than that of a sheep, existed all over the country. Around this time, next slide, please. Yeah. Around this time, paintings at Ajanta were showing innovative cotton growers having invented a roller machine to remove seeds from the cotton flower. India is the only country to cultivate all four cultivable varieties of Gossypium species. India was also no stranger to colored cotton either, from the dark brown in Bengal to yellow green in Garo Hills, light pink in peninsular India. The country has seen it all. The advent of BT cotton, which is long stable cotton, therefore conducive to being mill spun, has led to a slow erosion of indigenous strains of cotton, which are essentially short staple and therefore ideally suited for hand spinning. And this has led to a steady loss of agricultural heritage. The images that you see on the screen, the cotton flower, which is a natural brown, is grown in North Karnataka. And there is a startup called Kandu, which is working on a farm to fabric initiative using naturally colored brown cotton, which makes a lot of ecological sense because indigenous cotton by nature is drought and pest resistant, requires only naturally water, so there is no irrigation required, and it tends to be very, very hardy. And its color is naturally brown, so you can actually avoid dyeing the fabric into any other color. Instead, add another dyed fabric if you wish to. So this has a very low carbon footprint. The image in the center is from a startup called Cascom based in Tamil Nadu. They're working with the indigenous cotton in Tamil Nadu, a particular variety called Karungarni. What is very unique about Cascom is that the entire production process, which means the farming, uh, ginning, spinning, weaving, everything happens in a 30-kilometer radius, which means your fabric, when it comes to you, has not traveled too much. So it has not generated too much of a carbon footprint. So ecologically, these fabrics are extremely, extremely beneficial. The third image that you see is of Kala Cotton of Gujarat. Again, a very successful venture, a popular venture to very popular textile among textile enthusiasts. This is by Khamid is an organization that works with Kala cotton. You also have a lot of independent weavers using this fabric. Again, it's a desi cotton belonging to Gujarat, uh, very ideally suited for that kind of soil. So again, these three are very interesting but very different kinds of cotton that you see. The textures would be very different. Next slide. Yeah. What you see here is what you will get to experience when you do a cotton trail at Pollachi, which is near Coimbatore. I think we will go to the next slide and then come back to this Deeksha. Yeah. If you've seen Khaki's Instagram post, this picture attracted a lot of attention. This fabric actually has 6,400 hues. Now, if that sounds like a scene from Ripley's Believe It or Not, uh, you could actually do the cotton trail at Pollachi and find out for yourself that this is entirely possible. The previous slide again, Deeksha. A project by Apache Ecologic Cotton Private Limited, Ethicus has done the 6,400 hues in a fabric called the Rainbow Burst. You will get it as stoles, you will get it as saris. Uh, AELC started actually as a ginning company in 1945, and it has grown to a farm to fashion social enterprise. The project combines the globally acknowledged and homegrown Suvin cotton with a vision of an organic fashion brand that provides local weavers sustainable livelihoods. So the cotton trail at Pollachi will actually help you see the entire process, excluding, of course, the cotton growing. You can see the cotton that has arrived. This is a process called ginning, which removes the seeds from the cotton, and the processed cotton, which is baled. This is all Suvin cotton. Uh, Ethicus uses GOTS certified organic cotton, and this is how it is all processed. You can see the bales that have been pressed and sealed for processing in the spinning mills. And what you see, the next slide, uh, is the yarn that has been dyed, and it's on the loom, and this is how the fabric actually looks. So this is not a complete process image, but yes, this is roughly how it looks. This is the yarn, this is the second image is on the loom, and this is the third image. So each fabric will look very different from the previous one because of how beautifully it is woven. The next slide, which brings me to Fustat. I'm sure Cairo is a popular destination for those who are interested in heritage. So, Fustat, or Al Fustat as it was known, uh, next slide. This is the mosque of Amr ibn al-As in Old Cairo, or Fustat. This was built in 642 AD in the center of the capital of Egypt, Al Fustat. The original structure was the first mosque ever built in Egypt, in fact, the whole of Africa, and is one of the oldest in the world by that definition. Al Fustat was a city that grew out of an Arab army encampment on the site of what is now Cairo. The site also has an incredible link with textiles, specifically Indian textiles and block prints, that not too many are aware of when they go to Cairo. The next slide, please. These are the famous Fustat textiles, dating to around 1250 to 1350 AD or CE as we call it now. Take a moment to look at the textiles. You will see the predominant colors being uh, a red, a black, and an indigo. The next slide, please. You can see the block prints here. Now, all these, nearly all the textiles that were found in Fustat were said to have originated in Gujarat. And all came, these are all hand block printed, and you will find that these motifs exist even today in a lot of Islamic architecture and Jain architecture that we find in, including Jain manuscripts, to be honest, that we find in Gujarat today. If you look at very closely, I'm not sure how the resolution is over here, but if you look very closely, you will see that this is all hand spun cotton. The colors remain very vibrant even today. These images were taken when they were on display at the India and the World in 9 stories at the Prince of Wales Museum in Bombay a couple of years ago. So these are very recent images, and you can see how vibrant the textiles look. And research tells us that they've been used for clothing and furnishing, and even used to wrap um, a baby's body. One of them was used as a funeral wrap, a madder one. The next slide. Yeah, this one. So our history of textiles goes back here, and it's important to note that Pusta textiles are telling us a lot of things that we don't actually pay attention to. They tell us a lot of stories, really, of artisans whose knowledge of fabric and dyes was exemplary, and all these have been dyed using local resources, of blockmakers and printers whose skills were such that even after centuries, their work speaks volumes for their quality, of traders and buyers who acknowledged, appreciated, valued, and prized craftsmanship of India, of robust trade that was made possible because of these textiles, and of the subcontinent offering the most sought after textiles for centuries. The next slide, please. Next. Uh, Please look at these images very carefully, easily recognizable as the Ajanta cave paintings. I'm sure anyone who's gone to the site would have taken photographs of several of these paintings and admired these very rightfully. These 30 rock cut caves date from around 2nd century BCE to about 480 CE and are known for their frescoes and rock cut sculptures. Declared as World Heritage Site by UNESCO, they represent the finest surviving examples of Indian art. What is less known about these frescoes is that they are also one of the oldest and finest surviving documentation of Indian textile traditions. The paintings at Ajanta offer insights into dyeing processes. If you look at the paintings, you will see several colors. Again, you see white, you can see madder, which is the red, you can see a blue, which is indigo. So obviously, this tells us that people living back then knew how to work with local available natural resources to bring these dyes. Red was got from madder, black was got from iron rust, blue from indigo. Bleaching was obviously known to them and it's also been documented. If you look at the center image, you will see different shades of white that the two men seem to be wearing. The brighter of the one it has been bleached while the other has not been. So you know that this painting is actually talking about bleach, also gives us insights into the fact that they knew bleaching techniques back then. They obviously also knew mordanting. Mordanting helps fix the dye to the fabric, and the number of dips and the concentration of the mordant is what gives you the light to dark shade. So the fact that the paintings have these variations in color tells us that this technique was known to people back then. One of the paintings also shows muslin as a fabric in this. Weaving techniques, if you look at one of the images in cave one, the Shankapala Jataka, it has a painting of the Bodhisattva wearing a lower garment with ikat patterns in stripes. Between the stripes are small squares that appear like double ikat, where both the warp and the weft, that's the length and the breadth yarns that fall on those two, are also woven. You will see it over here. These stripes that you see in the first image could be ikat. Um, which means we're talking about a textile technique and a tradition that goes back way to the Ajanta paintings. And today, when we talk of ikat, there are three prominent centers that we think of. Next slide. The next slide, please. Today, when we talk of ikat, there are three places that we think of. One is Gujarat, of course, for the famous Patan Patola and the Rajkot Patolas, of course. We have Odisha and we have Telangana, probably more familiar as the Pochampalli ikat. What you see here is a close-up of the Patan Patola. It gives you a insight into the mathematical complexity that is required into weaving a complex weave like an ikat. The fact that this is complex enough today, but existed even way back during the period of the Ajanta frescoes, I think is amazing and a testimony to the craftsmanship that India has had. The Salvi family has been weaving the patolas for nearly 900 years. They have the GI tag for the weave, and it is a closely guarded family secret. It is said that even the girls are not taught, the girls of the family are not taught this technique because they don't want it to go outside of the family. The next slide, please. This is Odisha Ikat in all its splendor. You will see that the motifs are very different from what you've seen in the Patan Patola. Odisha has a lot of religious motifs and symbols coming from their own culture woven into their fabric. It has seen stalwarts like Gangadhar Meher and Chaturbhuj Meher and several others create magic on the loom for generations now. Uh, Odisha Ikat happens to be one of the most complex ikats that we have. One of the images actually has the alphabets woven, the alphabets woven into the sari using ikat. So amazing complexity coming from Odisha. Again, centuries old traditions. Next slide, please. The very famous Telia Rumal from Telangana. Telangana Ikat has an interesting history. It is said to have originated at Chirala in Andhra Pradesh and later moved to Telangana under the Nizams. The Telia Rumal is easily recognizable, especially by those familiar with textiles. Uh, Padma Shri Gajam Govardhan's family has been closely involved in weaving these for over 8 decades, and he himself has is credited a lot with the revival of these motifs. While the original technique is no longer followed for the Telia Rumal, the motifs are exceedingly popular. And again, you see on your right a close up of the motif that again shows how complex the weave is. It's a double ikat. You can see that both length and breadth of the yarns have been dyed. Very complex weaving, but again, one that has been centuries old and has been refined over the centuries in India. The next slide. I'm moving now to what is very, very popular in the tourist circuit as Hindustan Ka Dil. Hindustan Ka Dil Dekho says the Madhya Pradesh ad, and a popular circuit would be Indore, Maheshwar, Ujjain, Mandu. What a lot of people miss is Bagh. Next slide. Located around 145 kilometers from Indore are the Bagh Caves. These are a group of rock cut caves, 9 of them, out of which only 5 have survived. These are very much like the Ajanta caves, not probably as magnificent or not as well maintained. These have been cut out of a sandstone rock face of a hill on the banks of the Baghani, which is the seasonal stream. It is a seasonal stream. These are dated to around 5th, 6th centuries. The paintings here are not spiritual in theme, they are rather materialistic. The picture in the center is the Bhagani stream on which the Bagh caves are located. The paintings at Bagh have inspired the design language of the block prints named after them. The prints reflect not just the black, beige, and maroon colors of the cave, but are also inspired by the floral and geometric designs in the paintings found there. Next slide, please. Natural colors are extracted from locally available fruits, flowers, and seeds. For example, alum or fitkari is simmered, stored, and then boiled with the powder of tamarind seeds to get the red color that the textiles are known for. You will again see techniques, you will see the white, so bleaching is known. You will see indigo, you see black, you see some madder. Um, so different madder is used to get shades from pink to brown. So all those, these are the 3 predominant colors that you will find. And the last image here is used even today in Bagh's textiles. Next slide, please. These are the textiles at Bagh. The family of Sri Muhammad Yusuf Khatri, who has won 2 national awards and 6 UNESCO awards, has been working in the craft since the 7th century, which means almost right after the caves were built. From then, their family has been pursuing this uh, block printing art that we call the Bagh prints. Very, very popular in the textile, among the textile enthusiasts. And these are the textiles in various stages of process. This is where they are dipped into different solutions to embed the colors. This is the block printing being done, and this is the completed fabric over here that you see. Again, terrific insight into how the craft came into form and is inspired by something that was built 100 years after the family moved there. So this is a family that's been working for uh, from 7th century, and we are right now in 21st. I think that's a lot of depth to call it a living heritage. And Kazim Khatri, also an extremely talented young craftsman, son of Muhammad Yusuf Khatri, pursues the craft. So we have hope that the craft will continue into the next generation as well. Next. In contrast to what is happening at Bagh, I will talk about Pedana. Uh, People are familiar with the word chintz. Chintz is a word that originated for block prints that came out of a place in Andhra called Machilipatnam or Masulipatnam as it was called back then. The block prints catered predominantly to the Arab markets. The Arab traders were dominating the market, and the design language of this kalamkari here is very different from what you find at Srikalahasti, which is very religious. This has a very geometric and Islamic design language. Uh, Next slide, please. When the Europeans started entering the trade, they found these block prints extremely fascinating and they became very popular in Europe as chintz. The decline of the Indian story of chintz came when Europe, especially England, started mechanizing the entire process of making cloth and printing on them. With that came the decline of hand block printing at Pedana. There is only probably just one family pursuing the art at this moment. These images are courtesy Metaphor Racha that has worked with vintage blocks at Pedana. This is the intricacy that is there now. Unfortunately, this level of intricacy is no longer available at Pedana because they primarily cater to the US and European markets, which do not ask for such intricacy. So the design language has changed at Pedana. That has actually affected the block making skills itself. So now you don't have block makers who can do such intricate blocks. Therefore, you don't have printers who can print such intricate things. So it is not about just the block printer, it's also the block maker who counts in the entire value chain that we're talking about in handcrafted textiles. The next slide, please. These are vintage blocks used to hand block print this hand spun cotton from Karnataka at Pedana, one of the few who still work almost exclusively on hand block printing. Pichuka Srinivas Rao is assisted by his son Varun. This craft was brought into and popularized in Pedana by his grandfather. He caters primarily to the international market and has a very small domestic demand, he says. Next slide. I'm sure a lot of people have gone to Ladakh or it is on their bucket list. Ladakh is phenomenal in terms of landscapes, some spectacular landscapes available at Ladakh, right from the arid deserts to picturesque lakes. The mountains trekkers always are trying to summit some of the most arduous peaks of the Himalayas here. Lot of monasteries like the Hemis are visited. There are several others that are off the grid. Next slide, please. And this is from a monastery or a gompa called Alchi. One of the finest documentations of textiles in Ladakh is available at the Alchi Monastery. Unfortunately, no photography is allowed inside the monastery. The paintings that you see are from water outside the monastery, really. The next slide. Yeah, these are some of the paintings that are outside. This is in a very fragile condition, the Alchi Monastery. Not too many visitors compared to, say, Hemis and Thikse. But yes, Vasco and Alchi offer some very interesting insights into documentation of the textiles of that region. You must remember that Ladakh was on the Silk Route, and places like Shea fell directly at the on the trade route itself. So they had some very interesting textiles which have been documented through frescoes in these monasteries. Next slide. Pay very close attention to the second image. The first, of course, is a Tibetan brocade called the gyasal, um, found largely in monasteries and now even in fabric. The second image, Part of it is the silk. The second part is a wool that has been dyed in Himalayan indigo. And the focus for me is on that particular textile. The blue that you see on the wool comes from a locally available herb and is used to make indigo. Ladakh does not use indigo that is used in the rest of India primarily because the temperatures do not allow this kind of indigo that is used in the rest of the country to have the same impact on their textiles. Now, the locally available indigo is foraged by the Chamthang nomads of that region, and when they come down, they sell this herb to various people in the textile sector and earn their income. Now, increasing tourism and off-roading has eroded natural habitats of this herb, and the nomads have had to go further inland in its search. This has had a cascading effect on the supply and cost, opening the door for alternatives to the traditional dye used. I don't think many of us would actually pause and think about the impact tourism is having on something like the natural habitat of a very rare Himalayan herb that is used in their textiles. So while the rest of the country is looking at coming back to natural dyes, we are pushing a very popular tourist destination into using chemical dyes because their source of their natural dye is actually getting eroded because of us. Rampant tourism, I would not just say rampant tourism, probably I should actually qualify it by saying rampant irresponsible tourism. So the need is not to curb tourism, but to make it more responsible. Next slide. Not many people know of this place. This is situated literally in the heart of Leh and does not come on the tourist map. What you see on your screen used to be a caravanserai 150 years ago, and it was on the Silk Route. It was also the site of one of the first hotels of that region. Today, it stands at the entrance of a large compound which houses the privately owned Textile Museum of Ladakh. It is owned by Jigmat Narbu. It showcases vintage textiles belonging to the different tribes of Ladakh and places each in their appropriate socio-cultural setting. Jigmat Norbu, who set up the museum, is also credited with creating the first textile brand to come out of Ladakh. He uses traditional weaving techniques and natural dyes and creates a range of textiles that are used to create traditional Ladakhi garments as well as contemporary furnishing for the rest of the domestic and international market. This is right in the heart of Ladakh, so Leh. The next time you're going to Leh, do try and identify where this is, and probably you could hop across after you get an appointment with Jigmat for this. The next slide. I'm moving to the northeast because I do not see any other region in the country offering textiles of this diversity in the indigenous textiles, especially. There is a great diversity of indigenous textiles in the northeast. Next slide. While all traditional textiles draw inspiration from their immediate environment, indigenous textiles are the canvas on which a tribe records its history, growth, and status. It is the tribe's identity card. No other region shows as much diversity in this as the Northeast. Every tribe follows a design aesthetic that's unique to them and comes with firm boundaries on its usage. A warrior shawl called the Sumko Tepsu, belonging to the Aonagas, could only be worn by one who has claimed a certain number of heads. While head hunting is no longer practiced, it holds true even today that the shawl cannot be worn by any and everyone. There are strict rules that govern its usage. It's also equally true that the Northeast follows textile traditions that incorporate the most sustainable practices of production and to a large extent of consumption also. What you see on your screen is the GI tagged Muga or the golden silk of Assam, which is endemic to the state and is considered a valuable part of the state's diverse cultural heritage. This pride and recognition of this intrinsic value has led to several protective measures that are set in place to govern its farming and use. These are the cocoons of the Muga silkworm. You can see the yarn that is coming out. The second image is of the yarn that has just been spun. Freshly spun yarn is still sticky and wet. And once it's wound around the bobbin after it's dry, it has this lovely golden sheen that you see to it. Muga is endemic to Assam and therefore a very expensive textile, but one that is one of the strongest silks in the world. And it is a heritage textile. It is an heirloom fabric and one that is very, very expensive and therefore a luxury fabric. Next slide, please. I want to talk about really a little bit about what hand-woven textiles mean today before I go on to what this is, what the slide is showing. Hand-woven textiles form an increasingly fragile link between our past and future. There are an estimated 33 lakh households, according to the latest census, earning from this sector. To this, if we add the number of cotton farmers and those in sericulture, we get an idea of the numbers impacted by any action or inaction. With nearly 70% of the handloom weavers being women, the potential of this economic activity opening doors of financial inclusion and upward mobility is immense and has an exponential effect. The pride in the craft notwithstanding, there is a strong case to protect, preserve, and promote handwoven traditions. I'm just listing two or three of the reasons why I think handlooms need to be protected, preserved, and promoted. Weaving a single meter of cloth, they say, ensures a minimum of 12 livelihoods across the entire value chain. So when I buy 2 meters of yardage, I could easily say 12 families are living off the price that I have paid for it, including the man who has sold it to you, the business that has sold that to you. Indigenous strains of cotton are drought and pest resistant and are suited for hand spinning, which means we can actually generate employment for not just senior citizens, but also those who are not gainfully employable for any other reason, for whatever reason that may be. Spinning is something that actually can generate a lot of economic activity in rural India. It also generates a far less carbon footprint than machine made fabric. So, the solution for buyers really, the first thing that we look at is we see ourselves as handloom warriors. We're going out there to save handlooms. So we keep buying more in the hope that this buying of ours is going to protect and promote handlooms. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as that. I think we need to focus on buying better rather than just buying more. I think we need to stop seeing buying handlooms and handcrafted textiles as an expense. It's not how much did you spend on it, it's how much have you invested in that craft. What you see on your screen is a fabric called the Himru, a heritage fabric coming down right from the Mughals. Uh, on screen is Suraya Appa. She's a legend in her own right. Very little needs to be said by me. These are samples of a very, very complex textile called the Himru that is no longer woven in the traditional technique. It's not available anymore. To give you an idea of how complex it is, it requires two weavers sitting at a loom, uh, and you could weave probably not more than an inch a day. That's how complex it is. And if you do manage to weave a meter and you want to buy, it could cost you upward of 10,000. This is the fabric that the Mughals wore as pajamas and jackets. And I'm not talking just about the Mughals, but even the nobility, the aristocracy in the Deccan, and your Nizams, the Nawabs, they've all worn Himru. So if you go to the Chowmahalla Palace in Hyderabad, you will see samples of Himru jackets and tunics and pajamas that have been worn by the aristocracy and the nobility. This is the fabric. Unfortunately, a dying art. I would say it's already dead. But for the fact that at Suraya Appas, there are still a couple of weavers doing it, they have excellent documentation. This is located in Hyderabad. So Hyderabad has little nuggets like these other than the Charminar and Falaknuma. Lesser known, but I think it's worth visiting if you just want to understand the depth of the heritage that we are talking about today. The next. This is Geetatai Deshmukh of Pune, uh, an incredible woman. She's a Gandhian, a follower of Vinoba Bhave. What you see in front of her in the first image is the Ambar Charkha. She spins yarn every single day as a form of meditation. She also teaches school students free of cost how to spin yarn. What you see here is the yarn that she has spun. What she does at the end of creating a particular amount of yarn, is that she sends it to Wardha, which is where Magan Khadi is, and where Khadi is woven, spun and woven. And the sari that you see on the left is woven with the yarn that she has hand spun for herself. And the sari she wears is something that was gifted to her uh, 45, 47 years ago. So you see a lot of, I think, pride in our textile heritage, pride in our traditional techniques, and pride more than anything else in a philosophy of or in a manner of living. Uh, Next slide. Geeta Tai lives in Pune. For anyone who wants to actually meet her, she also works with organic farmers who and she plies you with some fabulous food, organic home cooked food. Uh, a wonderful person to meet, probably the last few left of her generation who do this. I want to talk about Paresh Patel of Ahmedabad. For those visiting Ahmedabad and seeing the Sibi Fayed Mosque and Sarkej Rosa, I recommend very highly that you visit Paresh Patel. He's working on what are called the original brocades of India, the Ashavali, the brocade of Gujarat, which has inspired your Banaras and Kanjivaram. He is a third generation entrepreneur. He is not a weaver, quite unusually. His expertise lies in natural dyes. He weaves the Gujarat, or rather uh, his unit has looms where they weave the Ashavali. You can see that the brocades. Ashavali is supposed to be the brocade that had actually inspired, that came from Persia and went to Benares and from there down south to Kanjivaram. Kanjivaram is the finer version of that brocade, they say. But yes, probably among the one or two people weaving this brocade in the country. So if you can take a day off, do visit Paresh Patel because this is as unique as they come. I recall saying peg three locations, Mahim, Thane, and Bandra. And the reason why I said that is that Mahim and Thane were originally, or when Mahikavati was established at what we now call Mahim, a lot of weavers settled around Thane and Mahim. So these are two centers from where what we now call Bombay, the islands of Bombay, and the original residents of Bombay, the original inhabitants of Bombay, got their textiles from. So you have two weaving clusters actually now, modern day Thane and modern day Mahim. Coming to the original inhabitants, I think anyone familiar with Bandra will know about the East Indians. The East Indians of Bandra were called the Kunbis, basically agrarian communities. A lot of them still live, the East Indians live in Gauthans in, let's say, Uttan, Manor, and areas, Dharavi, not Dharavi near Bandra, Dharavi near Uttan. They still follow the traditional form of lifestyle. And if you go to them and ask them where they source their lugda from, which is their traditional textile of that the East Indian women wear, they will tell you it is from a store in Mahim. And if you go to Mahim in those gullies, you will find that there's one tiny store there that has been selling the East Indian lugda for over 70 years now. This is not something that we actually would probably know as a Mumbaikar unless we look at indigenous textile traditions, and those indigenous textile traditions lie teeming within this metropolitan city and are away probably from where you are sitting right now. So if you want to look at East Indian communities and their textiles, all you need to do is head out towards Manor, Uttan, or that side, and you will find that it's a living tradition there. They still drape the lugda. They still get it from the same store in Mahim where generations of them have got it from. I can take questions now. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Someone has asked, is Ambar Charka same as Charka or handloom? Yes, of course. There are different kinds of charkas. Ambar Charka allows you to spin 6 to 8 or more, spindles at a time. Amber charka is the same as hand spun, except that you do not use the wooden spindle, and it's a less tedious process than the traditional spindle, which I showed in the first image. That is a very traditional spindle that we've seen even 5,000 years ago. Amber charka is equally not just a handloom, it's actually hands. The name of the shop that sells Lugda, I will get you the name. It's on my screen. I think it's Mahimwala. It's called Mahimwala. You can Google it, Google Maps, and the Google Maps drops you right outside their doorstep. What is the market for natural dyed fabric and outfits? It's a growing market. I would say it's becoming very, very popular, especially with the focus shifting to having more eco-friendly fabrics. Uh, so natural dyes are picking up. They are more expensive. So as a buyer, you need to research very well. That's right, JD Mahimwala, Glamstone. Thank you so much for that. Uh, yeah, you need to, as a customer, and this is not just for natural dyes, I would say for anyone buying handlooms, when you enter an exhibition, I can see people going berserk buying everything because everything looks so pretty. Oh, I don't have a pink, I don't have a lavender. I don't think that's the right way to buy a handloom textile. I think it's a great idea to actually set out a budget and plan it like how you would plan a holiday destination. What is the textile I want to invest in for say 2021? Is it going to be an Ashavali? So I'm going to read up about the Ashavali and figure out, is it coming in the budget? Is it a fabric that I'm going to wear occasionally, or is it something that I'm going to, wear every day and not pass it on to the next generation? There are so many things that govern buying. So yes, please do your research. Natural dyes are picking up. So yes, I will share details of Paresh Patel at Ahmedabad. He's on Instagram as Royal Brocades. I did not bring up the Kanjivaram for a very simple reason, because I think Kanjivarams are so popular that Kanjivaram and Banaras, the information is available at the click of a button. I wanted to specifically talk about textiles that not everyone talks about, and that I wish I could have included the East Indian Lugda, but that is something that I'm holding back for now. And Morgan, who's listening in, knows exactly why. We are working on a research paper. Uh, we have a Wiki Maharashtra Handloom Council, and one of the research papers we're working on is the indigenous textiles of the original inhabitants of Mumbai, which is the East Indian Lugda. So I will be able to share some pictures of it, but I will not be able to tell the whole story because that's research in progress. Marketing strategies for naturally dyed fabrics. I think there's a niche market available. It's about understanding the consumer, understanding your market, and I think most importantly, being very honest in your communication and being consistent about it. If you are someone who's dealing with natural dyes, and if you head out to Instagram and you look at Royal Brocades, Paresh puts out extremely informative and very, very well made videos on the weaving techniques, the natural dyes, how the yarns are dyed. So it's just about knowing whom to connect with, and you will have very authentic information available.
There's
Apart
another.
from Odisha, again, Kotpad is an indigenous textile of Odisha. Uh, uh, Kapil Mohanto is one of the most prominent weavers doing it. Traditionally available again only in madder. Used to be available only in madder. So you got, the very typical brown from the aal tree with a beige background. Of course, now they have expanded into using other colors because, you know, cu- customers keep asking, why are we getting the same colors? Why are we getting the same colors? So I think they're experimenting a bit with colors, but traditionally madder dyed colors, indigenous textile of Odisha. Where are the lugdas used by the Samvedi Christians? Currently, they're all lugdas, irrespective of who is wearing them, whether are all being woven in Telangana and Andhra, because the labor there is abundant. The cost of weaving is extremely low. So whatever you see currently as hand woven lugdas are coming from Telangana and Andhra. We do not have anyone doing it in Maharashtra, and that is quite tragic actually. We don't have weaving clusters close by, therefore It's a little difficult. Does the Indian government lend any support to the handloom and heritage industry? I would get into serious trouble for this. Uh, let's just say that much more needs to be done, much more, and it's a drop in the ocean. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
There was another question which went
It,
up very
yeah,
quickly,
yeah,
Sarita, and
yeah,
that was as follows: why do
yeah.
we hear only about men as master weavers and so on? And Glamstrom wants to know when this gender imbalance is going to be resolved.
Okay. So yes, that's a topic that's actually great because with 70% of the handloom sector, we women constitute 70% of the sector. But what is extremely tragic in the handloom value chain is that a woman's contribution is not acknowledged or it is underpaid if she's a weaver. For example, if you're looking at cotton farmers, spare a thought. When you close your mind, what is the image that comes? Very quickly, you can put it on the chat box. When I say cotton farmer, Vidarbha, who comes to mind?
A
The
man
man or
who
woman?
a man who committed suicide.
The man who committed suicide. What we don't see is the woman who has helped that man in the farm, in sowing the seeds. Cotton plucking is almost exclusively a woman's job because they have very nimble fingers. They don't talk much and they don't ask for much money. Sad but true. So across the handloom value chain, you have women working, constituting a bulk of the workforce, but they are underpaid. And when did this happen? I think it was always like this. Is this going to get corrected anytime soon? Unlikely ever. I think the gender imbalance is here to stay. What we can probably hope to do and we should be doing is keep highlighting this imbalance so that we can have a change from the top because this is a policy change that we need. So the more we talk about it, the more it is highlighted, the more research we have, and there is fabulous work being done. There is an organization called Makam that works with widows of these cotton farmers, helping them build their livelihood. So there is a lot of work going on. Of course, all of them are strapped for funds. They're strapped for funds, they're strapped for attention, and they're so busy doing the groundwork, they don't have the visibility that they really need. So this gender imbalance is not going to get corrected anytime soon unless there is a well-intended policy change that we can have, which I don't see happening anytime soon again.
There was a question whether there were any fabrics or textiles that can be said to be have originated in Bombay. Of course, you covered it in passing when you were talking about the weavers of Mahim and Thane. But
Mhm.
can any be said to have
Originating
originated
in
in Bombay?
Bombay, not really. This is a point I'd like to mention. Not Bombay, but the weaver communities. If you look at Pune also, if you go to Pune and you look at you go to a certain locality, they have a dedicated locality for weavers. Though
Mm.
Pune no longer has any looms left, the community is still very close knit, and they all work in the textile field as shop assistants or tailors. They're working in that. They're connected with textiles, but not with handlooms anymore because handlooms are not viable. In fact, someone brought up Kanjivaram. What I want to say is that if you want to buy a Kanjivaram, this might be a good time to buy because if I talk to the weavers, what they will tell you is that in the next 2 decades, there may be no Kanjivarams left because the next generation does not want to get into this occupation. The wages are low, the returns are very poor, and no one gives a bride if you're a weaver. That's a very
Sad.
real problem. They no, you do not get brides
Sad.
if you're a weaver. So no one wants to be that, and there are so many other opportunities. So I think if you want to extrapolate it to our own lives, if I was a dentist and I was a lousy, I mean, I was a good dentist, but I was not making any money. I don't think I'd be inspiring my kid to become a dentist because he's
True.
holding me as an example, right?
True.
So, Kanchivaram, if anyone wants to invest in the fabric, I think now is a good time because it's going to be something that's going to be off the radar by maybe in the next 1 or 2 generations. So,
That's
we'll
a
be
great,
talking about it in the past sense. What is
great tip.
ahimsa silk and is it traditional? Ahimsa silk is a word that has come up newly. It means that the silk worm or the cocoon has not, it has not been killed. it has been allowed to complete its complete life cycle. And yes, it is traditional. If you look at the Northeast, and I want to give an example of the Nagas here, the silkworm is protein rich, so it forms part of the diet in the Northeast, especially if you go to Nagaland. What the Nagas do is they need the worm, so they don't allow the cocoon to form completely. What they do is once the ejaculation of the fluid starts from the silkworm, they don't let it latch on to a leaf or a branch. What they do is they place all these on bamboo mats on the floor so it cannot cling to anything. And because it cannot cling to anything, all the fluid that's ejaculated forms a soft, ball outside of the silkworm. And once that stops, they pick up that fluff, the silk fluff that forms, and they use that as quilting material. It is an ambient fabric. It is ahimsa. They have not killed the silkworm. They will kill it later. They've used the silk and they will use the silk for silkworm to eat it later. But ahimsa silk is there. You have a person and you can Google his name, Kusuma Rajaya, based out of Hyderabad. Again, if you're visiting Hyderabad, a great person to visit. Kusuma Rajaya actually can provide certified ahimsa silk. He works in ahimsa silk and it's a patented product of his. And he actually issues a certificate saying that this is done ethically without killing silkworms. So yes, a lot of original ways of extracting silk have all been, ahimsa in that sense of the word. I do,
Uh,
Kavita Gadkari, I do have a visual of the East Indian Lugra. Maybe I don't have it right now, but it's somewhere on my phone. I'll probably just, if you could inbox me, I can share the picture with you. Yeah.
Malancha wants to know, is there any scope for private micro investment for women
Lots,
weavers?
lots in capitals, bold capitals, font size 1,000. There is lots of scope for micro investment. In fact, I believe that that is the way forward, probably, that a bottom up approach is what may work better in certain clusters. So let us say we want to revive the East Indian Lugra. Yeah, we want to bring it back. Certain designs of those have gone, and it is expensive to revive. It's not as easy to recreate textiles. And recreating is not just that, I'm a designer and I have revived XYZ weave and I sell 30 saris at say 1 lakh each, and then I close shop and say end of story. What happens to those weavers? So, who are we reviving this for? Am I reviving it for the designer? Am I reviving it for the cluster? Is there going to be a long term impact? So, we have to look at long term impact of our purchase, long term impact of our investment, long term impacts of revival. So, yes, if I want to revive the East Indian Lugda, let's say, one of those varieties, I would need micro investments. I would need, say, 30 people saying, okay, I'm going to put in, say, 5,000 rupees each, and let us revive this and let's see where this goes. And from there it builds into the next thing. I can talk about the kunbi here, which Wendell Rodrigues brought into national limelight. The kunbi inspired sari that Wendell did, and the Goa College of Home Science actually revived or recreated the using the original sample, the original design palette of the kunbi, or as they call it there, it's called the kapod in Goa, worn by the farm laborers, both Christian and Hindu farm laborers. So that became later one of India's first privately crowd-funded textile revival initiatives. A Facebook group with 10,000 women sitting on it said, "We are going to put 2,500 rupees each, and we are going to recreate the sari." And because it was women, each one of them waited for a year and a half, which was miraculous that a woman waits that long for a sari, to wear a sari that looked exactly like what 2000 others were going to wear. But what it did was it created sustainability for 5 families in Karnataka. And it's a project that is still going on 3 years down the line. So I think we need to look at what our micro investments are capable of doing. So anyone who has an idea for micro investments or knows people who can put this kind of money in, please welcome to get in touch with me at the Maharashtra Handloom Council. We'll be more than happy to initiate conversations on this.
So, Savitha, if I'm a
Yeah,
lay person and I want to make an investment, like you call it,
yeah,
how do I develop the discerning eye so that I'm not taken in by these wannabes who
yeah.
want to cash in on and make
Right,
a quick buck?
right. I'll be very honest here. I think it is quite like buying a house. When I go, what are the things I'm going to check out for? The builder's credibility, the builder's track record, how honestly and how openly are they communicating with me? Like, if I have a doubt, if I have queries, are they being cagey? Are they being upfront with the information? Am I able to verify that information with someone else? So what do I do? So XYZ builder is announcing a fabulous scheme, so I want to go and buy a flat over there. I'm going to call up people, say, do you know anyone who's bought a flat there? Can I
Mhm.
check how it is? Can I check the quality of the construction? So we do our basic research before, because it's our money. We're going to live there. I
Mhm.
would say the same extends to our textile. So if I want to buy a Kanjivaram, I'm going to research. It does not matter if you have to research for 3 months before buying it. It's time well invested. Before you invest your money, you have to invest your time. If you're putting your money in the stock markets, you are investing time first
Mhm.
and then your
Mhm.
money. This can be no different. So do read up. There are plenty of authentic, credible places where you can get information from. I would like to probably share a list, at least, of sources which do very ethical work on the ground, across the um, across weaves, who will be more than happy to just engage with you even if you're not going to buy from them. I think those are the kind of people I would trust, who are saying that even if you don't buy from me, it's okay. I'm happy to share this information. I'm happy that you're asking me questions.
I'm
So,
sure
yes,
that information will be very valuable for our people who are listening in.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it would be great if, if you're doing a business trip to Bangalore, uh, and if time permits, hop across, look on your Google Maps, look at Wimore Museum of Living Textiles, go and see what they're doing. That gives you an insight. It's a place to go to. It's insights that you gain. Unless you start gaining those insights, you won't be able to sift your research. You won't be able to
True,
sift the wheat from the chaff. In
true.
Mumbai, if we wish to show our children traditional looms, where would you recommend? Not even the museum, because even our museum does not have a traditional loom. The best bet is to get out of Mumbai and go to maybe Ahmedabad or someplace, because Mumbai has no looms, or maybe go to Paitan, Yeola, Aurangabad, Sholapur. These are handloom clusters in Maharashtra, Vidarbha. You can go across to these handloom clusters and you will see plenty of looms over there. But Mumbai, nowhere else. Savita, share your email ID. More than happy to. I do not teach anywhere actually. I don't teach. I am so sorry. I may sound like one, but I don't teach. My email ID is pravaha.communications@gmail.com. Happy to answer any queries that you may have. And Savita Suri
I'm just
on,
typing it for people's
yeah,
convenience.
please, please.
Pravaha
Dot communications
Communications.
at gmail.com. Pravaha is Pravaaha.
Okay,
Malansha, I have, I think,
got it.
yeah. Any other questions?
No, there are no other questions. Thank you. That was most fascinating, Savitha.
Thank you so much. I just
And
like to thank Khaki Labs, Khaki Tours, Bharat. Thanks a lot, Diksha and Farokh, and all of you for joining in today. I um, I am Savitha Suri on Facebook. I do have a platform called Anvaya. But if any of you have any queries, please feel free to reach me either via the email that Farokh has just posted, or you can inbox me to my FB ID. I'll be more than happy to answer. And anyone interested in connecting us with people who can invest in handlooms or has ideas, please do get in touch with us. We at the Maharashtra Handloom Council would be more than delighted to take these conversations forward. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Farokh and Bharat.
thank you. Thank you. Our
Thank you.
pleasure, totally. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for attending. and do attend as many of these talks as you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you.